I'm going to read to them, Nochi, about the disadvantages of being educated. Do you think they'll enjoy that? My interest in education had been comfortably asleep since my late youth, when circumstances waked it up again about 6 years ago. I then discovered that in the meantime our educational system had changed its aim. The difference seemed to be that while education was still spoken of as a preparation for life, the preparation was of a kind which bore less directly on intellect and character than in former times, and more directly on proficiency. This was written about 50 years ago. It aimed at what we used to call training rather than education, and it not only did very little with education, but seemed to assume that training was education, thus overriding a distinction that formerly was quite clear. 40 years ago, a man trained to proficiency in anything was respected accordingly, but was not regarded as an educated man or just as good on the strength of it. A trained mechanic, banker, dentist, or man of business all got due credit for proficiency, but their education, if they had any, lay behind that and was not confused with it. The training, in a word, bore directly upon what a person could do or get, while his education bore directly on neither one of those. It bore upon what he could become and be. Full of this idea, I rushed into print with the suggestion that in addition to our present system of schools, colleges, and universities, which are doing first-class work as training schools, we ought to have a few educational institutions. My notion was that the educable person ought to have something like an even chance with the ineducable, because he really is socially useful. I thought that even a society composed of well-trained ineducables might be improved by having a handful of educated persons sifted around in it every now and then. I therefore offered the suggestion, which did not seem exorbitant, that in a population of 120-odd million, there should be at least one set of institutions consisting of a grade school, a secondary school, and an undergraduate college, which should be strictly and rigorously educational and kept in perpetual quarantine against the contagion of training. My modest proposal was hardly in print before I received a letter from a friend in the University of Oxford propounding a point which, believe it or not, had never occurred to me. "But think," he wrote, "of the poor devils who shall have gone through your mill. It seems a cold-blooded thing to turn out a lot of people who simply can't make a living. As I understand your scheme," he said, "you're planning to breed a batch of cultivated, sensitive beings who would all die 6 months after they were exposed to our actual civilization." As I say, I'd never thought of that. It had never occurred to me that there might be disadvantages in being educated. I saw at once where my mistake lay. I had been looking at the matter from the point of view of an elderly person to whom such an education as he had had was just so much clear gain, not from the point of view of a youth who was about to make his start in the world. I saw at once that circumstances which had been more or less in favor of my educated contemporaries were all dead set against the educated youngster of today. Up to a few years ago, an educated person, even in the United States, was not wholly out of luck. Since then, however, an educated young man's chance, or an educated young woman's, is slim. Hence, our institutions, which profess to be educational, have probably done the right thing, the immediate right thing at any rate, in converting themselves, as our drugstores have done, into something that corresponds only very loosely with what they call themselves.